The winter of 1944 was bitter, unforgiving, and quiet, too quiet. Snow covered the dense Ardennes forest in a heavy, smothering silence. Most of us believed the war in the West was nearly over. The German army was broken, retreating across the Rhine, their cities burning under Allied bombs. We thought we'd be home soon. But deep in those frozen woods, Hitler was preparing his last, desperate gamble. And we were about to walk straight into it. Our unit was scattered along a thin defensive line in Belgium. Supplies were low, and spirits were mixed, a strange blend of exhaustion and hope. The Ardennes sector had been chosen as a quiet zone, a place where green divisions and weary men could rest. Nobody expected a major attack here. At dawn on December 16th, that illusion shattered. The ground shook before we even heard the guns. Then the thunder came, German artillery, hundreds of guns firing all at once, turning the forest into a furnace of splintering trees and churning snow. The men around me hit the ground as shells screamed overhead. The sky itself seemed to roar. "What the hell is happening?" someone shouted. But we all knew, deep down, this wasn't a raid. This was something big. Very big. As the shelling lifted, through the mist and smoke, came the unmistakable growl of engines. German tanks, not just any tanks, Tigers and Panthers, their silhouettes emerging like dark beasts from the fog. Infantry followed behind, disciplined, fast, determined. They weren't retreating anymore. They were attacking. The Germans struck with a force none of us had imagined they still possessed. Wehrmacht armored spearheads smashed into our thin lines, led by units like 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard SS Adolf Hitler under Kampfgruppe paper. We were outgunned, outnumbered, and outflanked in those first chaotic hours. I remember the first Tiger tank I saw, blackened from the cold, its gun barrel cutting through the mist like a spear. Later, I learned it was one of the feared Tiger I tanks tested and documented in American reports at Aberdeen Proving Ground months before. But in that moment, none of us cared about technical data. It was a monster, and it was coming straight at us. Our anti-tank guns fired, the rounds sparking off its frontal armor like pebbles against steel. "It's not stopping!" someone yelled. The Tiger advanced slowly, deliberately, its engine a deep growl that seemed to shake the ground itself. A shell from a nearby Sherman ricocheted off its turret. Another missed entirely. Then the Tiger's guns spoke, one thunderous crack, and the Sherman disappeared in a fireball. Around us, the front collapsed. German infantry moved through gaps with brutal precision, cutting off roads and hammering our positions. Radios screamed with broken messages. "Enemy armor, breakthrough, need reinforcements!" But there were none. This was Hitler's last throw of the dice, and we were the ones caught holding the line. We fell back through the woods, every step a struggle in the deep snow. The Ardennes forest, so quiet a week earlier, now burned with tracer fire and explosions. The sky was overcast, grounding our air support. That was exactly what the Germans had counted on, a surprise attack under bad weather. Without our planes, the battlefield belonged to their tanks and artillery. The Germans advanced fast. They moved through captured roads like a river breaking its banks, splitting Allied units apart. Villages that had been behind our lines one day were enemy strongholds the next. I still remember reaching the outskirts of St. Vith and seeing refugees, old men, women, children, trudging through the snow in silence, their breath hanging like smoke. War had come for them again. We set up defensive lines around crossroads, using whatever we could find: sandbags, wrecked trucks, and frozen earth. The officers barked orders, but the truth was we were buying time, nothing more. In the distance, the rumble of armor never stopped. "They're rolling through us like paper," a sergeant muttered. He wasn't wrong. In later years, historians would learn how Hitler planned this offensive with fanatical secrecy, hoping to split the Allied armies and capture Antwerp. He believed a decisive blow in the West could force the Allies to negotiate. For us on the ground, it was simpler. We were fighting to survive the storm. At Bastogne, the fight turned into something far more than a battle. It became a symbol. 101st Airborne Division, along with scattered tank units and artillery, dug in as the German ring closed around the town. Supplies were scarce, the weather brutal, and the enemy relentless. I wasn't in Bastogne at first, but when our unit was redirected there days later, what I saw burned itself into my memory. The town was half rubble, half ice. Wounded men filled makeshift aid stations. Artillery fire pounded day and night, shaking the ground and freezing our breath in the air. German tanks surrounded us, their engines echoing through the fog. Every road into the town was cut. We were alone. But there was something else, something that can't be captured in any report or map. A grim defiance. When German officers sent a message demanding our surrender, General McAuliffe famously replied with a single word: "Nuts!" That word spread through the town like fire. Men who hadn't slept in days grinned through cracked lips. It wasn't much, but it reminded us who we were. We dug in deeper. Machine guns were mounted in half-broken windows, bazookas hidden behind snowbanks. We were cold, starving, exhausted, and unbreakable. Then came the turning point. The clouds finally began to break. At first, it was just a sliver of blue sky. But for us, it meant everything. Allied aircraft, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, bombers, soared overhead like angels of vengeance. The Germans, who had moved so confidently under the cover of bad weather, were suddenly naked. I will never forget the sound of our planes arriving. Men climbed out of foxholes just to watch them streak across the sky. Thunderbolts dove on the roads, blasting convoys and tanks. Bombers hit supply lines behind enemy positions. The Luftwaffe barely appeared. Allied air power, once grounded, now roared back to life. On the ground, Patton's Third Army pushed north, smashing into the German flank. The offensive that had begun with such brutal surprise now began to falter. Fuel shortages crippled the German armored spearheads. Tigers and Panthers, those same monsters that had terrified us days earlier, stood abandoned on the roads, out of gas and trapped in the snow. The hunter was becoming the hunted. By January, the great German offensive was broken. What had begun as Hitler's last desperate gamble ended as a catastrophic failure. The snow-covered fields of the Ardennes were littered with burned tanks, shattered guns, and frozen bodies. The price was high. Over 80,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. But the German army had bled itself dry. It would never launch another offensive in the West. I walked through the wreckage in silence. The Tiger tank that had once seemed invincible now sat blackened, a silent carcass by the roadside. The smell of burned fuel and winter air lingered together, a smell that never really leaves you. Bastogne still stood, battered but unbowed. Years later, I would read the intelligence reports, the captured war diaries, the testimonies of German officers who believed they could still win. I saw their confidence laid bare in black ink. But I also saw what they didn't understand. It wasn't just tanks or planes that stopped them. It was the men who refused to yield in the snow. That winter, we faced Hitler's last gamble, and we won.